Alex, you are iconic. Thank you so much for being on the Heyo with Kelsey Moore podcast.
I love it, and I love the name, Heyo. I love that.
Thank you. And you even said it how I imagine it, so it's perfect.
We're perfectly in sync.
Absolutely. I was just telling you kind of off the air that you are a bit of a common denominator with me, my friends in person, and people that listen to me online. So this is just such an honor to have you on the show. To kickstart it, can you just tell us a bit of your story on how you started working for Turning Point and what you kind of envisioned the Spillover and the Real Alex Clark podcast to kind of be in 5 to 10 years?
Oh my gosh, in 5 to 10 years? Wow, that's two big questions, how I got here and then what I see in the future. Well, I came to Turning Point USA in July of 2019, so I just had my 5-year anniversary, which is insane. When I came here, it was to start a show covering pop culture from a conservative perspective, and it hadn't been done in the conservative movement before that. There was no pop culture show, and I don't mean that there's never been a conservative that has talked about a pop culture story, but I mean a very lighthearted, fun, entertaining show, kind of like E! News and Fox News having a baby. That's the first show that I built with Turning Point. We took about 3 months, launched it in October of 2019, and it was an Instagram show, daily show. It was 10 minutes a day, Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. And I just covered like the top 3 to 5 entertainment news stories of the day. It was just without, I would say, without the propaganda, without the leftist propaganda. So, whatever the Kardashians were doing, whatever was happening on The Bachelor, whatever Miley Cyrus was doing, except it was just, what does a conservative have to say about this? And what does a conservative have to say as a fan? So I think that was what was unique about me compared to other people in the movement, is that they could talk about the same story, but they were always very negative and very critical because they hated that person and they hated pop culture. Whereas I was like, I love this person. I love this show. I love this, but I disagree. And here's why. And I was also doing it with this very like silly, girly type of vibe, which everything else in the conservative movement at the time was extremely serious. And there's a place for that. And we need that. Obviously, like now being in an election year, that's what people gravitate towards. But when you're, especially on an off election year, I think we like to have a little bit of fun. So I built that show first, and I wanted to have a name for my audience that I didn't want to just say my followers or my fans or something like that. I wanted it to feel more like a relationship, and I wanted the name of my audience to embody really a movement or like a sisterhood. And so I came up with this name, Cuteservative. And so I started calling my audience Cuteservatives, and this entire movement was born. And it started small and has grown over time, of just women around the country that are like, hey, I love my country and I also like the Kardashians. There is a place for both. Like, I want someone that like dresses like me, is interested in fashion, is interested in pop culture, but that shares these same values of faith and family. And so that was the first show. And I did that for several years before Turning Point came to me and said, we'd love for you to start an additional show, being a podcast. And so that's how I started my show, The Spillover, which is currently once a week. I interview people that have interesting expertise or stories, and it's kind of transitioned more into this health and wellness podcast where I'm interviewing people that have I like to say, a remedy to heal a sick culture. And so when you talk about how I see the podcast growing in 5 to 10 years, well, my real answer for that is going to be coming very shortly. What I can say now is that I see myself fully focusing on those topics and on that subject matter, because if we as a country are too sick, and that's spiritually, mentally, physically, if we're too sick to make different cultural changes, then I mean, everything we're talking about is basically null and void if we're not even around to see it through. So that is where I see my podcast going, and where I see myself kind of spearheading my movement in my sector of the conservative movement.
Amazing. I told you, before that my kind of crunchy initiation story kind of was sparked because my personal and professional lives collided when I got negative, or I was experiencing negative side effects to taking hormonal birth control. And that's kind of what kickstarted me to start questioning different medical systems and questioning the links between, big ag, big pharma, big medicine. And I started making those links. And I have personally seen your show transition through that time. So do you have a personal, like, what started that personal interest in understanding that side of our sick culture?
Man, that's a good question because I think there was a lot of things happening that kind of got that ball rolling for me. So, one of the first things, obviously, we're enduring this pandemic and we've got this mandated shot, and that was very weird to me. I would say before the pandemic, I really did not think much about Big Pharma. I certainly didn't think anything about food. I was the self-proclaimed chicken nugget princess. I lived off processed food for basically my entire life. In high school, it was very normal for me to have 5 Rice Krispie treats for lunch and nothing else, maybe a red, like a fruit punch drink. And that was my lunch in high school because I was so picky and also just all I ate was junk. And that's like how I survived. It's interesting looking back. I've always consistently been about the same weight. But when I look now at pictures of me in high school and then even in my early to mid 20s, I can see how inflamed my face is. And it was like my weight was the same, but I was just so inflamed in my face. It was just like a totally different shape. It's so weird. Anyway, I didn't know anything about food. And if anybody, I grew up with one set of grandparents being very into like organic food and all this. And I remember being like 8 years old and making fun of them and just being like, organic. Like I just like didn't understand and thought it was so annoying. And now I am that person. So it's funny because now when I visit those grandparents, they're like, oh, like they have their bone broth and all this. And I was like, you guys are right. And ironically, I have 3 sets of living grandparents left, and the ones that have always been consistently into the organic living and crunchy lifestyle, they have basically 0 health issues, and they're way older than my other grandparents they're younger, but they also have never eaten that way, and now they've got all kinds of problems. So it's just interesting seeing all that play out. Anyway, I'm getting on a tangent. I tend to do this. Sorry. So I see the pandemic. I see the mandating the shot. I feel like that's an issue. I have a problem with that. And then I start looking into like big pharma. What is big pharma? How are the pharmaceutical industries corrupted? And then I start learning about Oxycontin. This is like a strange tangent, but I become obsessed with understanding how we got Oxycontin on the market and how it basically destroyed so many small towns across America and just lives in general. Then I get into Purdue Pharma. And I'm like obsessed with all this. Dope Sick comes out on Hulu. It's like the greatest show I've ever seen. And I'm like, how was this allowed? This is crazy. They knew that this prescription drug was going to kill people, that it was killing people. They kept it on the market. How is something like that allowed in this country? And when I started diving into big pharma, I thought, well, are there any other bigs? Are there any other industries that are kind of corrupt in the United States? And that led me to big food. And so I'm diving into like, well, what is big food? What do you mean that like Coca-Cola is able to tell, the government we want certain things, or like talk to the NAACP about, rigging different things and keeping soda on things because otherwise it's racist if you take it away. And just all of these things were really weird to me. And then I started reading a lot of books, and yeah, it just became my top obsession. And I just realized like, why are conservatives not talking about this more? Because if we care about not having this rigged government, not having a corrupt government, not having government tell us how to live our lives in all these different areas, that extends into the medical community, and it also extends into our food, something that we need and have to have and every single day. And we've basically just allowed that entire industry to be taken over. So all of that got me really fired up. And I hope that kind of answers the question. That's how I got obsessed with it. Is it was a normal it was a normal connection for me as a conservative to say, I understand how the media, how social media platforms, education, Hollywood, all of these other things have been corrupted by the left and by a corrupt big government. And then I'm seeing it now extend into pharma and food. It was just the next step in my radicalization as a conservative, I think, to become obsessed with that. Now, to be fair, the crunchy liberals were the ones who were obsessed with that historically. So they were there first. Conservatives are really behind on this. So that's why it's taken me this long.
Yeah, I love hearing that story. Two things on that. One is I always kind of make the differentiation that the term like granola feels more liberal, whereas crunchy feels more conservative. And I when I explain that to people, they're like, okay, I see that. It's a similar motive, but it comes out in different ways. And the second thing is I was in college studying exercise science, and I remember that moment that I realized and learned that Coca-Cola, I think, had paid the American College of Sports Medicine, I think it was $500 million for the phrase exercise is medicine, to
Ooh.
take the blame of food. Coca-Cola had paid the ACSM to take the obesity epidemic blame off of food and put it on exercise. And when I learned that, I was like, this is my whole study. This was my whole academic background. Now it
Well, and
almost
we saw
feels
that happen. We saw that happen with Michelle Obama's
yep.
entire initiative when she was first lady, which was
Mhm.
to tackle childhood obesity. And at first, it was about holding the food companies accountable for poisoning American citizens and our children. And then it transitioned into Let's Move campaign with Michelle Obama. And it was all about
Mhm.
exercise because we found out that the processed food companies told her, you better back off. And of course, she had Heinz
Mhm.
in the Obama administration and all this kind of stuff. So she had way too much stuff going on there, and she like couldn't actually follow through what she wanted to do, which was hold big food accountable. So it's very sick. It's very sick.
Totally. Totally. So you've transitioned from that. You recently went to the Rogue Food Conference with Joel Salatin at Polyface Farms. And I had thought about this particular question. And then I saw your interview with him. And I was like, this is what I want to follow up with Alex Clark on when I interview you, because I have thought this question for a long time and I'd love to get your perspective of it. I am convinced that I err more on the side of Joel Salatin with the idea that we actually should have less regulation of food because it would come down to the customers. And Joel brought that up to you in your interview. You know, he's a very staunch libertarian, and you had mentioned, well, Joel, we're so sick that wouldn't, fix the problem. So I think we should have more regulations. Since that interview, and since you've thought about it more, have you changed your mind on that stance, or are you still very much like acknowledging that the FDA and USDA are still influenced by so much money in big medicine and big pharma, but yet you're still wanting to trust them to give you regulations that align with your ideas? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's really complicated. And Joel had a very strong argument
Okay.
against this. So my stance is, and this is why I could never be libertarian, I think similar to the left, a lot of libertarian ideas, including Joel's idea on how to deal with food, is very idealistic. I do not think his idea is possible, which is he expressed when I asked him, what should we do about big food corruption and different ingredients that are allowed into our foods and things? I asked him what his idea would be to combat that. And he said, we do nothing to combat it. We put pressure on the consumer that it is up to you. If you basically want to kill yourself and your lineage by eating this crap, then go for it. He wants freedom in the way that like the person is solely responsible for that. And the more I sat with that conversation, one, it was so exciting to have that with him. And I love
Of
him so
course.
much and agree with so much of him, but he is a libertarian and I'm a
Yeah.
conservative.
Yeah.
So my pushback to that would be we can't ask. I love this idea. It would be great if we could just say, here's the information, make the right choice. The problem is the consumer doesn't have the information. The information is being kept from them. It is nearly impossible impossible for the everyday average consumer to hear anything about some of these ingredients or the fact that these food studies are being bought and paid for by the companies. You can't expect a customer to have informed consent, which is basically what Joel's saying. Give them informed consent. We put it on them. They make the decision to eat it or not, and then we rinse our hands of it, and that's not our problem. But I am saying what I was trying to say to Joel in the moment. I don't think I did as good of a job explaining it, is that we can't expect them to do that when the whole system is rigged. So when you read a study saying breakfast cereal is healthy for you, soda isn't bad for you, they're like, okay, well, I saw a study saying this. The FDA says it's okay. I'm suffering right now with like chronic dry eye. It's a symptom of Hashimoto's that I'm dealing with. And so I went to 2 different grocery stores locally looking for a homeopathic eye drop. And both Whole Foods and Sprouts said, sorry, the FDA just regulated. They said it's not safe. And so we can't sell it. It's been completely taken from our shelves. So the average consumer hears that and they're like, oh, well, I guess it's just not safe. That's not true. They're rigging it because some company, eye drop company, obviously wants it to be only theirs on the market, and they don't want what actually works and can actually cure it to go out to the consumer. So this is the type of stuff that we're dealing with, that it's like, we can't say we want this libertarian idea of everybody just gets to make their own decision when the information is so buried, or just it's blatantly lied about to the American consumer. So what I'm asking for is, yes, this is one of those cases where I do think we need to step in. The president needs to step in and say, we are going to regulate this to a certain extent so there's more transparency to the consumer, put a few laws in place, no more pharmaceutical ads on television networks, which is then allowing the pharmaceutical companies to control the information that is being given to the consumer on these news networks. These types of regulations can be put in place by the president. So that is what I would like to see. Obviously, there is a certain extent of personal responsibility, but to just say, no, I don't want anything. I mean, as a conservative, I do want the government to step in when we know that life is at risk. And we know that there are certain ingredients allowed in our food that is not allowed in other countries at this point, that is killing Americans, that is quadrupling our risk for diabetes, heart disease, hypertension in children, childhood obesity, all of these different things. So I disagree with Joel Salatin on that. I would say basically everything else, though, I would agree with him.
I get it. I get both sides, absolutely. Because on one hand, like you said, consumers from a libertarian perspective, the information they're still receiving is going to still be influenced by big food and big pharma. It's like they're getting handed lies. So how are they going to make a well-informed decision? But then on the other hand, it's like, okay, well, are we going to overhaul the USDA and FDA? That seems like also like an idealistic point of view. So it's kind of a hard balance, but I love that you brought up, that the president can put in place a very simple thing, just looking at international communities on what food is allowed, what ingredients are not allowed. And that's I think, a very moderate way to start. Absolutely. Now, we both work, and we're both Christians, and we work in Christian spaces. And so something that I'm very curious about, and you've kind of teased it recently on the Spillover, is just talking about Botox and fillers and surgery. Because I think that on one hand, we can talk about the health aspect of it. But then on the other hand, I think as Christian women, I don't know if we are talking about the responsibility that we have to display God's creation and beauty in a really well and moderate and healthy way to the next generation. So from your perspective, and because you work in news, you work in broadcasting, like you say all the time, you're on camera every single day. Do you feel like there's a sense of responsibility in this Cuteservative, crunchy movement that women need to take responsibility for maybe representing beauty to the next generation? I think, you mentioned it, Kylie Jenner is kind of pulling back on some of her treatments as well. So what is your stance on that in the conservative space?
Mm. Well, it's an interesting question. I think that there's a weird my hot take, I think there's a weird obsession with things like, filler, plastic surgery, and this like, well, don't we need to be, championing real beauty and natural beauty and all this, which is just it doesn't I just don't I am not passionate about that, and my whole thing is like, sure, so some people will say that, like, I'm very against it because I believe we need to be talking to the next generation about natural beauty, and I'm like, "Okay, so then do you color your hair? Do you wear makeup? Do you like" no, then you could go down a whole rabbit hole because then technically, if you do any of those things, if you even put mascara on, then you're not, focused on just natural beauty and promoting that to the next generation. So it's just to me, it's just ridiculous. And I just think just with filler and everything, beauty trends come and go. Hair that you had in the 80s is not the hair that you have today. The filler that we had in 2016 is not going to be the filler that we have, going forward. Like things are just going to be in and out of trend. I mean, right now, I think we're seeing a really big awakening on breast implants. In 15 years, we might see it all come back in trend again. Everybody had breast implants in the 90s, early 2000s. Now I feel like we're seeing a bunch of people getting breast explant surgery. So these things, people get mad at me about this. They're like, "You're defending it." I'm like, it's not that I'm defending it. I just think it's stupid. I just think it's dumb and I just don't care about it personally. And I think it's one of those things where it's like to each their own. I I'm not offended if, clearly, okay, Lara Trump clearly gets work done. I think it's very obvious that she touched up her filler at the RNC. Um, that doesn't offend me. She looks beautiful and I think she would look beautiful without it, but it's just there are people that get really, like, passionate about this, and, I mean, I get it all the time because when I was doing filler and Botox and things, it was like people were either really interested in that content and wanted to see more from me, or they were really upset by it and triggered and like, "I'm unfollowing you," blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I just think it's kind of funny. I guess if there's a sin that I have committed, it's not that I've had fillers or Botox before. It's that I poke the bear and antagonize people on purpose on the subject because I just like watching people squirm. Maybe I'm a little sadistic, but I like poking the bear on Twitter on this topic because I just think it's silly. And I think most men, and my hottest take, and men really get upset about, is I think most men cannot tell if a woman has Botox or not, even a little filler. When you go overboard on lip filler, it is obvious, but most women who are getting lip filler, you can't tell either. So the whole thing is just funny to me, and that's what I will say about that.
No, I love it. I think it's so funny and I love your passion behind it. My husband and I play this game when we're like watching reality TV, like maybe we're watching The Bachelor and I'll be like, "Hey, spot the lips." Like that's kind of what I say and he'll have to pick which girl has fake lips. And it's actually like you said, it's kind of surprising. Men don't see it. Like they legitimately do not see it, where I'm like, "Okay, I can tell that she's had these things worked on," but like most people cannot, they don't pay attention to it. I was going to ask, do you get more pushback about about this topic, or do you get more defensiveness and frustration from your followers when you poke the bear on motherhood issues and topics?
Oh my gosh, I was not expecting you to say motherhood. I thought you were going to say Taylor Swift. My
Oh,
most
honestly, I do not care about. I'm like, whatever, girl. You like Taylor Swift? Move on.
No, it's so crazy. The 3 things that I get the most heat about are, Taylor Swift, anything about plastic surgery or Botox. Basically, my apathy about it is, like, what really upsets people. And then I would say, probably talking about daycare and, yeah, like, all of the childhood development stuff in the first couple of years.
Yeah, I can imagine. My goodness. I don't have children yet and I barely poke that bear with people I love the most. So putting those opinions out on the internet is a whole new level. So I commend you on that. Um have your personal views about childcare, birth experiences, the medical system surrounding birth. I can only assume that your personal views have changed over the years since you've had such phenomenal guests on your show. But I would love to hear you speak about that if you, if that was pretty radical for you.
Oh, yeah. once you start going down the food rabbit hole and the pharma rabbit hole, you go into everything. You get into, the birthing experience for the average American woman in this country. And I mean that by like the hospital C-section phenomenon. All of this stuff is so evil. And then of course, daycare, the lie that we've been told since the 70s that it's good for your kids to put them in daycare. They need to socialize. They'll be smarter. There's no downsides at all to it. I would say, well, I'm trying to think of when I first started my career was 2012. I started in radio, pop radio. And I would say then I think I was like, oh yeah, I'll have a nanny. I plan to work and all these things. Now my stance after learning everything that I've learned and talking to different experts about the first 3 years of a child's life being so critically important for their attachment and things is that I would be either completely pulling back entirely, like not doing a show, period, or just depending on like what those conversations would look like with my husband, or it would be dialing it down to where like I show up and record, my bulk episodes for the entire month within like 2 days or something like that. And then I'm home. Like, so whatever I do, my workload would be dialed down like 80%. But and then strategically, and that's the thing about podcasting is like this is my full-time, like my job is podcasting. Like, so when people say what do you do for a living, it's podcaster now. So my flexibility looks a lot different, admittedly. And I totally get how that could be frustrating to my average audience member, which is going to be a woman who is just working like a traditional 9-to-5 job and hearing this information. She probably doesn't have as much flexibility with me or as I do of like, I'm going to completely change my hours and be like, I'm coming in 2 days a month to, do all this work for filming 2 episodes a week or 1 episode a week or whatever I am doing. So it's just, I understand that there's a certain privilege with the type of career I'm in. Candace Owens is the same. Ali Stuckey is the same because everybody wants to bring them up. Like, well, they're working as mothers and they're talking about all this. I'm like, yeah, but you guys don't and I don't know totally the ins and outs. I know a little bit. I know I'm friends with Ali. I'm not friends with Candace. So like not as a dig, it's just, I don't know Candace personally. So I know Ali personally, and I understand that she does structure her day so that she is with her kids basically the majority of her day every day. So people just don't understand that. Right now I'm in an office all day long. So that I obviously would not keep that up if I were to get married and have kids. And that's just on God's timing. I've never purposely put off marriage and children. I mean, basically, if I would have met my husband at 18, I would have been overjoyed to get married at 18, but it just hasn't happened. So, I've been radicalized on all of that. I probably wouldn't have thought anything about it. Now I'm like, oh, I want to have a home birth. I need to be the main person or my husband, the main person raising our kids, that type of thing.
Yeah. Have you found that your real life friends and family have fully accepted this new like crunchy Alex, or would you say that they look at you like you're kind of crazy? I'm curious because just depending on your friend groups, I think most crunchy women at some point maybe have had some pushback from friends and family. And especially in the motherhood space, it feels like a little spicy. So I'm curious, just on a personal level, ever since you started diving down these like big topics, how has your personal friendships been with all of it?
For the most part, it's been very like they're on the same journey and they agree. I would say with my family, nobody cares that I am into all this. Some of them are like, I want to learn more, tell me more. Some of them are like, that's cool for you, but like I'm eating what I want or doing what I want. And I try to, especially with my own parents, like I don't know. I'm going to like show a good example when I'm visiting and then you guys can eat with me and eat what I'm eating or not. But, and then with friends, I would say some of my best friends, it's like, oh my gosh, I agree with everything. And then, sometimes it's stuff like, well, so I didn't do this. So does this mean you're judging me, because I didn't do this when I first had a kid? And my answer to that is like, of course not. You're also not responsible for things that you didn't know when you didn't know them. So most of my friends have been married now for going on, 6, 7, 8 years, and they've had several kids and things like that. And so it's like several years ago, I mean, I was also eating like only processed food. If I would have had a kid at the same time as you, they would have been circumcised, fully vaccinated, eating junk. I didn't know anything then that I knew now. So if I also would have had kids, it would be totally different. So I'm like, I don't blame you for anything. I mean, you choose to do this going forward or not. And what I've seen with my friends is that their first kids were all the things that they wouldn't do going forward. So it's like with each kid, it's like a little less vaccines, a little less vaccines, a little less vaccines, totally unvaccinated. Now we're eating, beef liver during my pregnancy, whereas before I was like Taco Bell every day. We learn as we go. We do the best as we can. We do the best we can as we're learning. And I mean, that is what it is. So yeah, there's been like some things of like questioning me, like, so do you think like I'm a horrible mother now? And which like hurts and is frustrating because of course I don't. And so I just try to explain that to them. Like, no, I don't judge you because I would have done the same thing at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, I appreciate you sharing that because I personally feel that a lot of times, I think my friends and family will come back like, well, do you judge me? And I recognize like at the end of the day, I say the same thing. You made a decision with the information you had at the time. And of course, I don't judge you. But that potentially could also be their own defensiveness coming out, reflection of how they feel about a choice that they made. Maybe they feel like they regret that choice now that they have new information. And that shame and guilt is obviously not from Christ. So they have to kind of work through that themselves. But it can be a little bit difficulting and isolating. And it also becomes kind of funny when you would never say all of these harsh topics to them in person, but when you have an online presence, then all of a sudden you're talking about it in like a public forum way, then they're like,
Yep.
hold on, you didn't say this to me in person. So that back and forth is hard.
That is probably verbatim, basically the types of text
Yeah.
conversation, emotional text conversations I've had to go through. Yeah. Since
Yeah.
going down this journey.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
again, I'm like, this episode isn't directed at you personally. I'm talking about this. I don't hold anything against you. You do what you want. This is what I think. You raise your kids how you want. I'm going to, God willing, raise my kids how I want if I get to have children. So it's like, I don't know. But it's hard because yeah, when I'm passionately talking about it publicly, they assume that I'm just like constantly harboring this like, I don't know, dislike towards them or their parenting choices. I'm like, I have to be honest with you and tell you, I never think about it. Like, I never think about you. I'm not thinking about you during the episode or while I'm asking these questions, or I'm like, I don't think about it till you bring it up, So, but yeah, it's just a thing.
Totally. No, I totally get it. Transitioning to a different topic, because you already brought it up, I am so curious if you are going to have a guest on talking about breast implants. Can I ask you that question?
Yes. So I do have something very exciting in the works for the next coming months. Yeah, you have not only that to look forward to, but a lot of other stuff. A lot of other stuff that I think people are really gonna like freak out over.
Love it. I love it. Never enough Alex Clark, that's for sure.
Thank
Okay, so what other topics, like, can you personally talk about just some books that you're reading, other topics that you're diving down? I don't want to spill anything about the spillover, but, are there any books that you're particularly loving right now?
Yes. So I'm actually reading Dark Calories by Dr. Kate Shanahan. She is a doctor who specializes in everything seed oils. So she just came out with her brand new book with all of this research talking about vegetable oils and how they are basically destroying American health, leading the charge in destroying American health. So I'm reading that. Basically, somebody asked me this recently about the types of books I read, and I was like, well, I am very much a fiction girly. I love fiction. So I have Riley Sager's brand new book, Middle of the Night. He's a thriller writer. I have that I'm working through, and Dr. Kate's book. And then otherwise, like if I'm reading nonfiction, it's basically parenting or health. And then otherwise I'm reading fiction. So those are the 2 books that are on my nightstand right now, as well
Love
as
it.
a little notebook that says schemes.
Again, very Alex Clark of you.
Picked that up at some weird little store in Austin. I had to have it.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh, just plotting some,
Plotting and scheming,
revenge
always.
of some form.
I
That's
never
so
stop.
funny.
That's why I didn't go to the RNC. I'm plotting and scheming. I've got a lot I'm working on here behind the scenes.
Sounds like it. I saw it on your Instagram yesterday. Again, not to be a creeper, but I was like, girl looks busy.
I'm busy. We're trying to we're recording a lot right now, and yeah, coming up with some exciting announcements.
Speaking of busy and the RNC, but your own version, how was YWLS?
Oh my gosh. Wow. YWLS was crazily enough. So we knew because of we had our own Turning Point USA, which is who I work for, who produces my show. Turning Point had our own version of the RNC. It was called the People's Conference in
Okay.
Detroit a couple weeks after YWLS. And we have Turning Point USA is a 501c3 nonprofit charity. It's not a humongous like corporate conglomerate. I mean, we have a like pretty small staff, compared to like Daily Wire or something. And so we have a small events team of like, I don't know how many's on there now, 8 or 9 women, who are the ones that are responsible for doing everything when it comes to Turning Point events. And so these only like 8 people are planning and dealing with YWLS plus the People's Conference, plus we had some other stuff that we were doing and some different events this month in July when we're recording this. And so they told me, they're like, hey, because we have all these other things going on, we have to like do a little bit of a smaller venue for YWLS. We have to dial it down just a smidge so that we can like, get everything done, or we're going to like, lose it. So I was like, cool, okay. And I was just expecting that this YWLS, like, while it's always good, I was just expecting it to not be, I don't know, to the caliber that past years were, because it was going to be a smaller size. And it ended up being my favorite YWLS we've ever had. Aesthetically, the stage, the speakers, chef's kiss. There was bare minimum things that I would have changed. And I told them that. I was like, guys, you had me thinking like the stage wasn't going to be as exciting and all this stuff. I was like, and it was absolutely all of it, like my favorite we've ever done. So YWLS was incredible. And there was a really big focus on health and wellness this year. Next year, we'll probably do some of that, but then go back to like a little bit more conservative speakers. It's usually typically like very, very political. This year, it was very overwhelmingly health focused with a little bit political. And the next year we'll probably go back to half and half. It was just that most of the speakers, again, they needed to have these other conferences in a short amount of time, and people, can't have 4 months or 4 weeks out of a month traveling, so it's like, we got to pick and choose. Let's have them at the blatant political conference and let's let Alex do her thing this year. So if you were at YWLS this year, which is our Young Women's Leadership Summit, it's an all women's conference that Turning Point puts on every June, it was very much Alex Clark influence. Like it always is, but way more than normal. So you were lucky if you got to experience it, if I do say so myself.
I love it. Yeah, man, I was so jealous. I had serious FOMO. I was trying to make it work with my work schedule to get out there, and it wasn't happening, but man, I was like living vicariously through all of the Instagram stories. But
Well, it's every June, the beginning, like the second weekend of June, usually, always in Texas. So just plan accordingly for next year. Anyone listening, you do not want to miss. It's the best event in the conservative movement for women. Like there's nothing that touches it.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was so jealous. And something that I'm trying to like articulate and boil down like all of these big topics and why, they are sticking with the conservative movement. And I think it's this overarching idea of, we have, we have a responsibility to steward the things around us as Christians. That's our body, our children, our land, our family, our relationships. Liberals in the left wing, culture, they do not take responsibility for anything, for any of that, to be honest. And so I think YWLS really harbored that really well. That it's this whole idea of taking back responsibility for all of those topics. And while you maybe didn't have as many political, speakers there this year, I think you hit the nail on the head. So I just wanted to publicly commend you. I thought it was incredible, and the people that you chose. Um,
Thank you.
how was interviewing House and Habit? Big time girlfriend. Oh my goodness.
I was so nervous. I've never been so nervous, and it was mainly so a fun fact about me is that I hate public speaking. So, like, actually, YWLS is always like, I'm really, really nervous every year because I speak, and then, for me to go and do a live spillover interview, it's nice to just hope and assume when you're recording and you don't see the listeners, like, oh, they're gonna laugh here, they're gonna enjoy this, or they're gonna be, engaged, they're not gonna get bored. And when you put a live audience aspect to a to a podcast recording, then it's like in real time I will know, is this engaging? Is it entertaining? Is it fun? Is it a flop? And so I was just like, please God, let this be good. And she was also extremely nervous. I mean, she was like, she was asking me things before we go out, like, how do I sit? And I was like, well, just normal. She was like really overanalyzing too, like being really nervous. And so I think she ended up doing great. I think you can tell in the beginning, both her and I are very nervous. And then we get progressively more comfortable as the interview goes. But that was the first time I've ever done a podcast with a live audience. So yeah, that was a big growth moment for me. She's also a huge guest. I think she has a fascinating story as a pop culture investigative reporter, journalist who was very far left and then has now moved progressively more moderate right since in the last couple years. So her whole political transformation story is so good. And also, she's one of those guests where it's like, I want to have her first before anyone else. Like that, there's also that like layer of competitiveness within the conservative movement is, Candace, me, different people. It's like there are certain people that any of us could easily interview, and it's like you want to be the first one. So I was like really excited to have her before anyone else did. So that was just like a cool moment for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, gosh, don't you wish that you could interview her now after the Trump assassination attempt? Oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah. I mean, she would have she is at the RNC now, and I'm sure she's gonna have a
Mhm.
lot to say in her Substack write-up about her experience at the RNC.
I can only imagine. Yeah. I mean, doesn't she have one of the leading Substack communities?
She does.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. Oh my gosh. Wow. Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us today? I mean, you're a wealth of knowledge, and I don't want to take advantage of you, but you quite are incredible.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm trying to think. I just wanna say that, if you are a spillover listener and you have been listening for the last several years and you've really been enjoying it this last year and a half, we're about to ramp things up, to a level the likes of which I think you're gonna be really excited about and surprised and like, "Wow, this is really growing," and, it's been a long time coming, a lot of work in progress. I have been trying to get this done since February, and, so it's just been many months of pleading my case of different things that I wanted to do and, convincing the suits, as I like to call them on my show. So anyway, a lot of, like, change is coming, but a really, really good change that it might be strange at first, and take a little getting used to, but it's for the best, and it will also, I think, you guys will be very excited once you see everything.
I'm very excited. I'm personally very excited. I have a hunch because I think I saw on one of the YWLS um, interviews that you did that you had, hinted at potentially a rebrand. And I
Yeah.
thought that it was personally hilarious that you have such loyal followers that they were like not about the rebrand. But I was like, Alex is already rebranding. You need to cheer for the rebrand.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not going to confirm nor deny what is coming, but
Yeah.
what I will say is that at first when people are told like, do you want to stay the same in what you're comfortable and what you are familiar with versus radical change, they're going to say I want what's comfortable and familiar with
Right.
and, not change. Everybody is resistant to change at first and then, they're good. So anyway, yeah, don't worry. I'm just asking for people to trust me. That's all I'm asking for.
We've trusted you on many other topics, so I think you're going to be okay with this one.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your afternoon. I hope to catch up with you again at another point.
Sounds good. We'll have a
Thanks,
lot to
Alex.
talk about.
Absolutely. Bye.